Welcome to this episode of the Patrick Coffin Show. Before I introduce the topic, I want to invite you to come to Germany. We're going to the Alps, Catholic Bavaria, Altötting, Regensburg. We're going to go into Austria to Salzburg to see where The Sound of Music was filmed. We're going to end up in Oberammergau to see the live Passion Play, which is put on every 10 years. So it's happening next May 17th through 25th. Go to patrickcoffin.media/pilgrimage and join us. There's a few seats left. We're not going to do a big, fat, multi-bus tour. This is a pilgrimage of faith, and our spiritual director is the actor, capital A actor, that's the official term, of the canonization cause of Father Patrick Peyton, the famous Irish-born priest who said famously, the family that prays together stays together. So we want you to join us. Father Willie Raymond is that spiritual director, and this is going to be great. I've never been to Germany, but our guest has. One more time, here's the link, patrickcoffin.media/pilgrimage. Today, we're going to talk about the largest, most popular, unapproved, and I believe unapprovable apparition in Catholic Church history. That's Medjugorje in now Bosnia-Herzegovina. And we're going to talk with the author of a book that was my first kind of red pill in the direction of saying there's something seriously wrong here. The book is called The Medjugorje Deception. Its author is E. Michael Jones, and he's here to talk about it. Be right back. Yes, indeed. Back to the Patrick Coffin Show is Dr. E. Michael Jones, the editor and founder of Culture Wars magazine, culturewars.com. He's also the author of Slaughter of Cities and Monsters from the Id and the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit and Libido Dominandi, in a book where I first encountered his writing, Degenerate Moderns. Mike, welcome back.
Thank you, Patrick.
Now, your book covers not just June 1981, when these 6 teenagers, including the young Yakov Kola, who was 10 years old at the time, but you go back to World War II and the Srmanci massacre and the historic tension between the local OFM Franciscans and the local bishop all the way up to the Holy See, and that era would have been Paul VI. Tell us about how you first heard the word Medjugorje and what piqued your interest from the beginning.
Well, I had started Fidelity magazine in 1981 and got the reputation of being serious about being Catholic. And at that point in time, if you were serious about being Catholic, someone would refer to you to Medjugorje, because this was the thing that was happening. It was cutting edge. The Blessed Mother had appeared in someplace over there, Yugoslavia, it was called. And this was the cutting edge. This was God on earth, the Blessed Mother, up to date, the whole thing. So you could not avoid it in that position. And so I gradually started to hear more and more of this story. Now, 1 year after I started the magazine, I went to Fatima. So I had some sort of basis with which I could compare what I was hearing with what I knew about Fatima. And what I was hearing simply didn't add up in the way that Fatima did. So in '84, I was in Rome, and there meet Mark Miravalli, who was a student at the Angelicum at that point. And Mark said to me, "Would you like to go to Medjugorje? I'm going in a week or so." And I said, "No, thanks." He went, and he became one of the biggest disciples of this movement. But I stayed behind, and I became more and more skeptical. The more I heard, the more skeptical I became. I could not get a straight story from anyone about what was going on. So I ended up going in May of 1988 for the first time on my own. I figured I had to do something. I had to be able to get to the bottom. And the first thing I did when I got there is I went to see the Bishop of Mostar, who was the bishop of that diocese. Mostar is the biggest town near Medjugorje. It's in the beautiful Neretva River Valley. It's one of the prettiest rivers I've ever seen in my life. The water is turquoise, and Mostar means old bridge in Serbo-Croatian, and there's an old bridge there, one single arch old bridge, which I saw for the first time when I went there. When I got in to see the bishop.
That was Pavao Žanić?
Pavao Žanić, right. He was at the end of that. Before I walked in, you look across the Neretva Valley, and there's a mountain on the other side, and in stones, in Serbo-Croatian, there's a message saying, "Tito, we love you." This is 1988. This is 8 years after Tito died. So he's still a presence there. He was the man that was holding this whole Yugoslavian thing together with his personality. He was gone, and you could feel the kind of ferment that was going on in this place as a result of that. So I met with the bishop, and in a sense, I mean, he spoke French. My French is not that good, but his assistant spoke German. So between French and German, we had a long interview in which I had to basically revise my categories. I had to. Bosnia is like Chinatown. If you saw that movie, you know.
Yeah, forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown.
Jake, this is Chinatown. The normal rules don't apply here. And I came with this idea that there's liberals fighting conservatives in the Catholic Church from my years outside of Notre Dame, and you go there, and that's not the story here. That is not the story. It is a very kind of idiosyncratic story about Islam sweeping through the Balkans, and how the Franciscans reacted to Islam, and how the bishop reacted to Islam, and suddenly there's a battle between the bishop and these Franciscans. That I never heard about this. I didn't know what was going on, so I'm trying to get oriented here. And then he starts telling me his story about how everyone had a sense of expectation at this moment. 1981 is 1 year after Tito died. To the north, you had Solidarity, which was basically on its way to overthrowing communism in Poland. You had the same sense
for folks who are under 30. Those of us remember Solidarność, the red banners. This is the labor movement, kind of an anti-communist effort in Poland, right? In the John Paul II Gdansk era.
Right.
Okay.
And there was certainly a Catholic element, and even a Marian element to that, because you saw these workers at the Gdansk shipyard going to confession in the open air and praying the rosary.
Yep.
So here we have the sense that the Blessed Mother is going to triumph over communism. That's the message of Fatima.
Right.
That's true. I believe that. Mm-hmm. And here it looks as if it's happening. This is exciting, except it's not true. I mean, so I talked to the bishop. The bishop has had the same initial kind of excitement that I just expressed. And then he interviews the seers. And what you get is basically the seers getting involved in one contradiction, one lie after another.
Mike, if we can,
finally the bishop.
I just want to press pause a little bit and let people know that Bishop Pavao Žanić was very Marian. He led many pilgrimages to Fatima and to Lourdes, and he was initially, I mean, what bishop wouldn't be honored to have the Mother of God appear in his diocese? So his initial reaction was cautious optimism or openness.
Right. And I'm saying the initial reaction disappeared as soon as he started talking to the seers. Now, we have to remember here, not many people speak Serbo-Croatian. Mm-hmm. It's like a secret language that these people share. And this is in many ways why the local bishop is the authority in this matter, because he can speak to these people in their language, speak to them directly. This was also unique in this situation because almost immediately from the beginning of the so-called apparitions, the Franciscans stepped in as a barrier and a filter that basically would screen out all of the absurdities that were coming out of the mouths of the children. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mention a lot of these things in the book. Yeah. Yakov saying that if the bloody handkerchief had fallen into the stream, it would be the end of the world, or stuff like this, crazy stuff.
The Vitska bloody handkerchief, which ends up being appearing in her diaries, and right. the woman wrapped in black was the Blessed Virgin Mary, and luckily the taxi driver didn't do that because it would have been the end of the world. Just beyond absurd. Yes.
And so the bishop could get at these people firsthand, and he starts to find out that there are contradictions, and suddenly he realizes this can't be true. And at that point, their attitude toward the bishop changes, and he becomes the enemy. And at this point, they start floating all sorts of slanders against the local bishop, and also against his successor. As soon as I posted the Medjugorje book again, all of the slanders came out. He's a homosexual. He's a communist. He's this. He's that. All of this filth comes out about these people who are simply being courageous in doing their job. So what happened here at this point is that a Frenchman by the name of Louis Bélanger, French-Canadian, he comes out with a book in collaboration with a Franciscan priest from Medjugorje by the name of Ivo Sieveric.
Yep.
And what they do is basically produce the transcript of the interviews that were taken during the first few days after the initial apparitions. These were conducted by Tomislav Vlasic and Jozo Zovko.
And we're going to get to those two in a moment, too.
Yes, yeah. But I think Vlasic was out of town at the moment. Zovko's there. He's suddenly confronted with this mania. You know, it's like a moral panic. I mean, people are just so primed for something like this to happen that for people from all over Yugoslavia show up. There's a supposed site of the apparitions, and they start throwing dinar, they start throwing money into the hole, and it's a kind of hysteria takes over here. So Zovko is the parish priest at this point, Jozo Zovko, and he decides he's going to interview them, and he takes them in, and the transcript of the interview was in Louis Bélanger's book, and I quote it here. It was translated by Father Sieveric, who speaks Serbo-Croatian, who lived in the village, actually. And what you see is basically, again, now the priest is catching the kids in contradictions. Now, the difference between Jozo Zovko and Žanić is Žanić says, okay, that's it. We're not going to deal with this anymore. But Zovko sees a moment of opportunity because in his mind, first of all, he's a flaming supporter of the Ustaša and Croatian nationalism. He's also a member of the Franciscan order that is in rebellion, fighting a war against the bishop, and suddenly he sees new ammunition in that war. And so instead of just sending the kids home, he says, have the next apparition in the church. At this point, you have a crucial turning point because it's not just this apparition. No child ever convinced the world that he saw the Blessed Mother without the assistance of some type of church authority. And at this point, the church authority, the local church authority, in Jozo Zovko, step in and say what they're saying is true. That's when the apparition starts, and that you have to evaluate it in light of the authorities, the Franciscans, who basically endorsed what these kids were doing.
So Father Zovko saw the opportunity to domesticate and control this hysteria, the alleged apparitions, by getting his arms around even the location of where they would take place. I mean, I don't remember Juan Diego or St. Bernadette Subaru or the kids at Fatima ordering the Blessed Mother around as to where she's going to appear, but it seems like that they're the tiller and the Blessed Mother is the ship.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was a symbolic act. When those seers moved inside of the church, when they moved off the hillside inside of the church, this was the Franciscans taking control of that apparition. At that point, the Blessed Mother was basically a hostage of the seers, and she would appear wherever they were. So we have another unique aspect of this. The Blessed Mother appears at Fatima. It's called Our Lady of Fatima because that's the only place she appeared. But now the Blessed Mother is following the seers around all over the world, appearing on trains, checking out if it's daylight savings time or not, appearing basically on the demand of the seers.
Did you make the documentary Visions on Demand during that 88 trip, or was that later?
No. No, that was 96, 97,
Oh, I see,
98.
okay.
That
also
was 10 years later.
And can people get that at culturewars.com?
That's at the culturewars.com website.
Okay.
You can
Also,
watch it there.
Everything that we're talking about today, dear listener, is available. I'm going to send the link to patrickcoffin.media, including the Father Ivo Sieveric book, co-written by Louis Bélanger, and Donald Foley's book, I want to mention, Medjugorje Revisited, which also has the transcripts of the interviews. It's just so many directions to go in. At that point, when they're inside, that's when Louis Bélanger and his cameraman capture something really interesting, which to me is a deal breaker altogether. And that is, I want to say Jean-Louis Martin was the guy who, to test the assertion of the seers that when they're in this ecstasy, they see absolutely nothing. They're in a complete ecstasy, out of time and space. All they see is the Gospa, which is Our Lady. And so he does the,
the Three Stooges.
That's the Three Stooges move. He pokes his index and middle finger at Vichka's eyes, and she does what you and I would do. She jerks her head back momentarily. Yeah. And then the apparition's over, and then
this is on film too.
Right, that's right. I'm going to put the link up as well. I think you can still find it on Vimeo, and I will, so I'll put it there as well. Now, the priest who brings them back up, I believe Louis told me himself, is then Father Ivo Ivitzko Vega, who has also been laicized.
Suspended.
Suspended? Okay, well.
It was suspended. You may know more about the
I think it's another, we're going to get to that as well. The number of spiritual directors that have gone completely off the rails is astounding, way out of proportion, and in no way resembling any other approved apparitions of the church. But the explanation was given on the spot. Viska's laughing, kind of grinning nervously, and through the interpreter, she says that at some point during that apparition, it seemed as though the gospel was going to drop the baby Jesus, and she thought she would lunge out and support him, maybe catch our divine Savior before he hit the ground.
Nice of her to do that.
Yeah, except that she's jerking the wrong way, though.
Jesus can be. You know how heavy he can be holding him for eternity. You know what I mean? That's a long time.
That reminds me of another Medjugorje spin-off that maybe we can, because this could be easily a 9-part series. The Gospa has also recommended books that are on the index of forbidden books, like Maria Valtorta's poem of the man god. And one of the seers said that the Blessed Virgin told her it makes for good reading, which makes you wonder, is she reading Shakespeare or like Danielle Steele novels? Is she up in heaven in a comfortable chair?
Eternity's a long time. Believe me, you need a big bookshelf to keep yourself occupied for all eternity.
Oh, I hate to laugh. Okay, so then this is now the first week. I want to focus on the first week because you spend a lot of time in your book, which is now on sale, I might add, on that first week in the opening months of the apparition phenomenon. Because now, as then in a certain way, the Catholic Church has traditionally given authority to approve or to condemn an apparition claim to the local ordinary, which makes sense. It's the principle of subsidiarity. The person is presumed to know the most, speaks that language, and so on. Both bishops, Pavao Žanić and his successor, who's even more anti-Medjugorje, Ratko Perić, have been ignored and derided and shamed and slandered. And now, under Pope Francis, Archbishop Heinrich Hoser, a retired archbishop from Poland, was deputized to be a kind of visitator for the sake of pastoral care of pilgrims. I can't quite grasp, Mike, maybe you can help me. Why does the church focus so much on spending time with the pilgrims when the Blessed Virgin Mary in the church's own official documents has never appeared once there? It's it's a forked tongue message.
You're right. It's a subterfuge. It's a subterfuge that is being used to get around the fact that the local bishops, both of them, have condemned it. Now, how are we? And when you think of the bigger picture here, of course, from the beginning, this apparition has been an attack on the authority of the church, because the authority of the church is embodied in those two men, in those two bishops. So it's been an attack on that from the beginning. What you saw in the intermediary period, most of which was the papacy of John Paul II, was kind of silence, a kind of silence by absence of comment. Mm-hmm. Now, when I was with Bishop Žanić, he told me that he had just spoken to Cardinal Ratzinger. He had just gotten back from Rome. He had just spoken to Cardinal Ratzinger. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, what did Ratzinger say? And he said, he agreed with me. Okay? And Ratzinger told me the same thing. I met him in Philadelphia years later, and I said, what's your opinion? And he said, I share the opinion of the local bishop. At that time, it was still Pavao Žanić. Okay, and then Žanić told me that, and then I met with Pope John Paul II And I told him what the story was. And then I said, well, what did Pope John Paul II say? And Žanić said, he said nothing. This is the difference between the Pope and Ratzinger at this point. Now, it requires some interpretation, and the interpretation that I'm putting on it, that I put on in this book, is that Pope John Paul II was heavily involved in the anti-communist crusade at this point. He was in a bind because he wanted to promote any type of Marian piety that would be perceived of as anti-communist, but at the same time, he did not want to overturn the authority of the local bishop, which he would have to do if he were to approve it. So what he did was say nothing, and the silence became deafening over this period of time. When I was also, about a week after I had spoken to Bishop Žanić in Mostar, I flew to Rome, and there I met with Frank Shakespeare, who was then ambassador to Rome.
Under Reagan.
Sorry, ambassador to the Vatican, United States ambassador to the Vatican. And I said, Frank, is the United States government promoting Medjugorje? He says, well, I can't say anything about that. But, and then he says, this is the type of thing that we would support. So with that in mind, I came back and I wrote to the CIA. And I said, please send me your dossier on Medjugorje, Freedom of Information Act. And after that, a while later, I get a 20-page document, 19 3/4 of which has been blacked out, and a bill for $150. So I want to go on record right now as saying I stiffed the CIA for $150. Okay, I did not pay that bill. I wrote them a nasty letter. So what you're seeing here is basically layer upon layer piling up here to propelling this into ever greater audiences. And one of the most significant layers was the anti-communist crusade. This was seen as an asset. It was seen as basically solidarity south.
South, right.
Solidarity south, in other words, Yugoslavia, the same type of thing. Marian devotion being used as your friend Patrick Peyton would have seen it as part of the anti-communist crusade. That's what that Rosary Crusade was, and this was the final culmination of that Marian devotion as part of the anti-communist crusade.
Did John Paul II stay silent as a way of trying to balance the two commitments that he would have had to have as the Vicar of Christ? On the one hand, uphold the authority of the local bishop, but also let as many horses out of the barn as possible to create a kind of a sequel to what happened in Poland. And maybe it'll catch fire, and maybe, just maybe, it's actually all true. Because John Paul II went to Sarajevo. He also went to an approved shrine not 20 minutes from Medjugorje.
Krosno.
What is it? Krosno, okay. No public statement for or against Medjugorje, because if you just do a Google search, John Paul II, Medjugorje, there's all kinds of claims that he said it was the spiritual nerve center of the world, that if I wasn't Pope, I could easily go there.
Pope, I'd be there today.
Yeah.
I've heard that over and over. The nuncio, I wrote to the nuncio in the United States, and he said the Pope made no such claim. No such claim. And it's consistent. What he did, there was silence here. There was silence. He did go to Hrozno, which is an approved apparition. Now, this is a conspicuous gesture because Medjugorje, as you said, is only a few kilometers away from this place. Yeah. And it's obviously much bigger. Nobody knows about Hrozno, but they knew about Medjugorje, and he ignored Medjugorje. Okay? That's a gesture that speaks volumes. But unfortunately, it's a silent gesture. It is not during this period of time, there was all of this clamor. My trip to Medjugorje was a reaction to this clamor of basically Catholics saying, is this true? Is it true or not? And so what you're seeing now is, well, we're not going to talk about that. The Italian statement is not non è vero ma è ben trovato. It's not true, but it's a great story. And that's basically what's happening now with Medjugorje. So we're not going to say whether it's true or not, but we're going to take care of the pilgrims. Or we're going to lead a pilgrimage now with all of these archbishops for Youth Day or something like that. But this should not be taken as an endorsement of the authenticity of the apparitions. Well, who are you trying to kid? Of course it's an endorsement.
Yeah.
And so what we're having here is a double game. And unfortunately, His Holiness is playing along with this double game here.
I think in deputizing Archbishop Hoser, he sort of put his proxy on the ground there to maintain the weaponized ambiguity. Because depending on who he's talking to, he's very careful to say, this is not official church approval, but look at the graces Our Lady is pouring out here, as though people can, thread that needle.
This is known as the fruits argument. And the main filter here is there are no negative fruits to Medjugorje. Okay, all we talk about are positive things. There are talks of cures. I asked Žanić when I was there. I asked Perić as well. Have there been cures? Žanić said, if you think that there is a cure, you have to go to the center at Lourdes where it will be documented. And he said, at this point, there are no cures. Nothing has happened.
Let me kick the tires a little bit here, because I've gotten this a lot from people whose lives were sincerely changed from debauched sin to daily mass going. And the argument runs like this: how can the devil provoke or even allow so many good spiritual fruits, changed lives, sobriety, religious vocations? Because that's where it gets a little complicated for someone who's not really paying attention. They think, because I went 10 years never hearing a peep of negative information about Medjugorje. So it sounds on the face of it like a valid argument that the devil can't be the source of so much conversion. What say you?
Yeah, the man who had the answer here was Father Philip Pavić. He was a Franciscan. He went there. He believed in it, and then he started hearing confessions when he was there. And it was one horror story after another, not so much about past lives, but of actual demonic activity that was happening in Medjugorje at the time. He could tell me story after story. And so his conclusion was people would tell him the same thing, the fruits argument, and he'd say, look, just because you were born doesn't mean your parents were married. Okay, it's good that you were born. Okay, but that doesn't mean that the antecedents to that were good. I mean, you could have been born because someone raped your mother. There are all kinds of. You could have been born out of adultery. Okay, but the fact that you're born is good. It's good to exist because the option is non-existence. Okay, but that doesn't mean that what brought you into existence was good. That doesn't follow. And so what you have here is the same type of thing. You may experience a conversion. If you do, well, that's attributable to God, okay? But it's not attributable to a lie that is being told to undermine church authority. It's not. And the other side of the coin, of course, is what about the negative fruits? Have you talked about the negative things that have happened there? In the lives of the spiritual advisors alone, you have all sorts of negative.
Mike, this is really important. I want to touch on this for a moment. If you want to talk the fruits argument, we have to talk about all the fruits, and the much bigger fruit is the global fruit of disobedience and calumny against the local bishop. In every country, I'm willing to bet, where there are Catholics, there's some small rump of Medjugorje fanatics who an angel can come down from heaven and explain to them why the Blessed Virgin has never appeared there. They're not going to buy it. And so this may explain why church authority is nervous to unambiguously condemn it with the Pope's signature on it, because what's at play here is the possibility of schism. The Church of Medjugorje, I can see it happening. I don't think that's the case. I understand what you're saying. I think that I said this when Pope Benedict resigned. I said the measure of corruption in the church can be taken from what happens to Medjugorje, because Medjugorje is a center of money laundering, it's a center of sex trafficking, and it's also a center of demonic activity. And those people, the people who are profiting from this
do not want any type of investigation. They want nothing to happen, because if nothing happens, they can go on making money hand over fist. And they can use that money to corrupt people in Rome, whose responsibility is to back up the local bishop, but who will be more interested because of sin in taking money and indulging their passions than they are in the truth. That's the story. One thing I just like to get this straight as well. What I said about Pavic and the demonic activity, this is not an exaggeration. This is not metaphorical. I'm talking about something real here. So when the book came out, I got a call from a Unitarian from Boston who said, he went to Medjugorje because these pious Italian ladies took him there, and he said, I had an experience there, and no one's been able to explain the experience to me. So he said, I was in the bed and breakfast, I'm in my room, the door of the room is open, and then up a naked woman walks into the room. Okay, she's got her head down, he can't see her face. She walks across the room, and then she walks through the wall. And he says to me, what do you think that was? And I said, well, it probably wasn't the Blessed Mother, because generally she wears clothes when she appears. Okay, and then I said, have you ever heard of angels? And the Unitarian had also heard of angels. Okay, so I said, there are good angels and there are bad angels. And bad angels can appear in forms that will try to lead you into sin. And I said, what you probably saw was a bad angel. And I said, this is because Medjugorje is infested with evil spirits. I mentioned the testimony of Philip Pavic. And then years later, this is corroborated by the fact that Tomislav Vlasic, the other priest, we haven't talked about him, the other priest who was there at the beginning, has not only been suspended, that happened years ago, but he's been defrocked.
Yeah, very soon after Benedict was elected, he moved on Vlasic for sins against the Sixth Commandment, and the key point here, trafficking in spirits.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up. So this is more corroboration that Medjugorje is infested with demons, infested with evil spirits, and they are smarter than you are. They are smarter than you are. And someone who had experience with these type of mystical phenomena was St. John of the Cross, and he said, the devil rejoices when people seek private revelations, because they know how gullible human beings are, and they know that they can confect all sorts of illusions that will drag you into more and more serious sin.
I want to ask two things here, Mike, on this, the demonic side. And you take pains in the book to distinguish a ghost from a demon. A ghost is a kind of a mental image in the mind of the seer about someone who's deceased, who maybe has issues and is trying to get our attention. Maybe they're in purgatory. A demon is an ontologically separate entity. It's a fallen angel, as you say. There seems to be two currents here. One current is from the past, and that is the echo, if you will, of the massacre that occurred on the other side of the hill. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Shermanci? Shermanci.
Yeah.
That was a terrible, my gosh, just something out of a horror movie no one would believe, except that it happened. So there's that event that happened that may or may not have had some kind of causal tie-in at play with a lot of the kind of occultish things that happen there. But then you have the other current, and that is all the dislocations from the Second Vatican Council, the Church's new relationship to the world, the Church's new relationship to Catholics. You've got the failed sexual revolution and all its kind of turbulent wake and screwed up lives, and people are suddenly more hungry now for something tangible, something that'll make them go, ooh and ah. Medjugorje is like in the perfect storm of the past and the present. Does that make sense?
Yeah. We're talking about two very different things, though.
Right.
One of the things that causes a ghost to appear is a guilty conscience. Macbeth is the classic example of this. Macbeth sees Banquo's ghost. No one else can see it because no one else bears his guilt. And so that's why I began the book with the chapter on the ghosts of Shermanci, which is basically the guilt that this village incurred because of its participation in that slaughter of Serbs on the other side of the mountain. This is a limestone plateau, and the water trickles through limestone and creates caves, and they're called yama in Serbo-Croatian. And basically, they lined these people up on the edge, and they shot them, and they fell into the cave, into the pit, and that's where they died. I'm saying that this played a role in the village. The village needed some type of redemption from the guilt of its past. And what better type of redemption than to have the Blessed Mother appear on your soil? And she's asserting that you're okay. You're okay. Now, the same psychological dynamic would apply to people like me, baby boomers, who the baby boomers were taking part and got dislocated by the sexual revolution. So I'm flying back I'm going from Dubrovnik to Rome, and I got one lady on one side, one lady on the other, and they're both telling me about the sexual sins of their youth and how Medjugorje made them feel better about those sexual sins because they weren't getting this type of reassurance from the church. Everything after the Second Vatican Council seemed to be in flux. There's this disorientation that shifted into the church. You could see it in people like Dennis Nolan, a big Medjugorje promoter who went to Notre Dame and had his faith destroyed because the professors were preaching heresy. And he didn't know what to do, and he thought, you can't depend on reason. I'm going straight to the top. The Blessed Mother is talking to me. For Dennis, it was the charismatic movement, and that was the Holy Spirit speaking directly to him, and then suddenly the Blessed Mother picks up. When the charismatic movement starts to go down, suddenly Medjugorje starts coming up, and it was obviously it was related to the charismatic movement as well. So I'm saying you have the psychological dynamic in both instances, both for the villagers and their guilt about World War II, and also with a church that had been disrupted by the sexual revolution.
So the people that I know who are very wedded to Medjugorje, who've been there like 8-10 times, tend to be wounded middle-aged people who suddenly glommed onto something that felt real, unlike the boring old, tabernacle and stuff that's going on at the parish. It's like a new reason to live. And they're totally impervious to logic. It doesn't matter to them that the local bishop has given the thumbs down. It's not of interest to them because Medjugorje represents the victory of emotional subjectivism over the objective teaching of the church. And that to me is why it's a deal breaker.
I think you're right. I think that's exactly what's happening. And that's also why you get such a violent reaction when you start trying to be rational. So what you're seeing here is that their ill at ease has basically become fixated as part of a rebellion against the church. And if the church were to say, well, the local bishop of Rome were to say, look, the local bishop said it, it's over, maybe there would be some type of reaction. I think that the danger was more, let's say 20, 30 years ago. I just think it's dying out now. I don't know how many people go there, but I mean, over here, people don't talk about it. Over here in South Bend, Indiana, there used to be a Medjugorje conference at Notre Dame every year that drew thousands of people. Well, that hasn't happened in years. I mean, I think 20 years it hasn't happened. So it's dying out here. But there may still be this residual fear of the pastorally minded clergy who are just playing into the hand of the devil, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. I don't think it was a good idea to allow diocesan pilgrimages because of the de facto message that it sends. I think it's just kind of giving more fuel to the empty tank. One thing, since you mentioned Tomislav Vlasic, who kind of took over from Father Zovko as the ringleader or the main manipulator. He's the one who wrote to John Paul II in 1983 saying, all the seers are going to enter religious life. Divine Providence has made him the spiritual director of the seers. The Gospa, so the entity that they're seeing or not seeing, said that Father Vlasic is guiding you well. Within weeks of Benedict's election to Pope in 2005, he defrocked Vlasic, who's now running a New Age UFO cult with another fake seer in Italy. I'm going to put that link too. It's called the Central Nucleus. Really strange stuff. And on that website, Medjugorje is still front and center.
Yeah.
Ivica Vego, another priest who got someone pregnant, and he was defrocked. Now he's married somewhere. But Vlasic himself hid the fact that he got a nun pregnant in 1975 and abandoned the son. You bring that out in the book as well.
Yeah.
And then all the other, in America, the spin-off phenomenon of Gianna Talone Sullivan in St. Timothy's. I think it's Mesa, Arizona. Father Jack Spalding, who appears in your book, he was under interdict and I believe has been excommunicated for sins against the Sixth Commandment. Father Ken Roberts was suspended from his priesthood. He was the guy who wrote From Playboy to Priest, the British-born former flight attendant who became a priest. Also suspended, God rest his soul. So that's all part of, if you want to make the fruit argument, you have to add these in too.
That's right. And it's all rigorously excluded. And as soon as you eliminate any type of discussion of the truth of the apparitions from the pastoral concerns, it will never get discussed. It's a way of suppressing the discussion of the reality of the situation. And Vlasic, as you're pointing out, is a crucial figure. You cannot understand Medjugorje unless you understand the role that Tomislav Vlasic and Jozo Zovko played in its promotion. So it's from the beginning. Again, we're talking about some type of psychological justification. Tomislav Vlasic, at the time of the apparitions, has a child living in Munich, fathered by a nun who was living with him in Zagreb. He feels that his vocation is being threatened. He wonders, should I leave the priesthood? Maybe I should just raise that child, maybe go up there and live with Manda. Manda Kozel was her name. Mm-hmm. What should I do? And so he comes back, and suddenly there's this huge furor, and Zovko is trying to hold down the fort, and everybody's showing up, and he suddenly feels that there's some type of psychological vindication for his priesthood. And at that point, as you indicated, he takes control of the seers, and then he starts putting words in their mouth. And what are the words saying? Well, they're vindicating Tomislav Vlasic. And then it gets more and more extreme until one point, we played a role in this. During the research, I sent a reporter over. At this time, Maria Pavlovich was living in Parma at a community which was basically endorsed by the Blessed Mother.
Yep.
That's what the message said. So the reporter shows up. She sees Maria Pavlovich. She's getting ready, and then she confronts her with the story of the illegitimate child, the whole sexual scandal surrounding Vlasic. At this point, next day, Maria Pavlovich issued a statement, and she said, "What I said yesterday is not true. I said it because Tomislav Vlasic pressured me into saying it." Now, that was in writing. We had the written statement. And at this point, it's over. It's over because there are very definite criteria about whether this is a true apparition. If you're talking about the criteria, they were established by Benedict XIV in terms of canonization and also apparitions. And he said, number one, if there's any evidence of lying or any evidence of manipulation by third parties, this is immediate proof that it's not to be taken, it's not true, it's not to be taken seriously. You had both of them in one stroke, and that should eliminate any further discussion. Now, what we have instead is these political machinations like the Ruini Commission.
The Ruini Commission,
right. The Ruini Commission comes up with absurd statement that the first 7 apparitions were true, but all the other ones are false. So the other 40,000 are false. Am I saying this correctly?
Well, it's a rumor that the Ruini Commission, someone allegedly leaked the report to Andrea Tornielli, who's a pro-Medjugorje, pro-Francis, rah-rah Italian journalist. No one has actually seen it beyond that rumor.
Okay.
So, but that gets spread around the world. What's the thing about the truth? The truth's halfway around the world before you can correct it, something like that.
Yeah. The point here is it's an all or nothing proposition here. You can't have 7 true apparitions and then 45,000 false apparitions.
Yeah.
You know,
Damning with
common
faint
sense
praise.
tells you because what you evaluate this, the church has no supernatural charism. This is not an article of faith, a dogma of faith or morals. You judge this the way you would judge a defendant in a criminal trial. That's the way this thing is divided. And if the testimony of the witness is shown to be false, then that's the end of the story. That has happened repeatedly with Medjugorje all the way from the beginning, and yet this thing just kind of staggers on. And now it's been given new life by this kind of vacillation and machination from Rome.
There's a retired bishop exorcist from Italy, Bishop Andrea Gemma, and I'll use a profanity here because he did. He said that Medjugorje runs on the devil's shit, meaning money, that it's completely false, that they're under the inspiration of Satan to profit economically. Do you think they're seeing something? Do you think it's fraudulent, or do you think this is some entity that's visible and audible but ain't the Blessed Virgin? Do you have any take on that?
No, I do not. It could be both. I think there's evidence for both. I mean, I think if you want my honest opinion about the beginning, I think they were caught smoking dope, and I think they lied their way out of it by this story. I'm the first one. I read the transcript, and Mirjana, who was the oldest one, she had a reputation of being a pankarica. And I said to Ivo Siveric, I said, what's that Croatian word pankarica? And he said, I don't know. I never heard of that word before. Well, what it is punk. It's punker with itza, the feminine ending on it. So I'm the one who figured that out. So that was her reputation because she had gone to Sarajevo and was studying at the university there. Right. She comes back, and the kids are caught doing something that they shouldn't have been doing. And it seems to me it has something to do with smoking.
Well, that comes up Mike, that comes up in the interviews that you've referred to in Father Ivric and Donald Foley's book, where the first answer, Bishop Žanić asked them, what were you doing there? This is I guess Wednesday, the 24th of June, I think it is. I may have the date wrong. And they said, we're tending sheep. And he said, I remind you, telling a lie is a sin. And then one of them, I think it's Mirjana, spits out, well, actually, no, we went smoking. So on the spot, they changed their story, but what they were smoking was not revealed. Yes.
So whatever it is, okay. This is why I make the analogy with the Salem witch trials, because this was children. The children are not going to go anywhere. The local religious authority, whether it's the Puritan minister or the Catholic priest, has the final say, and either can say, go home and get a spanking from your parents for lying, or it's God and he's moving here. And that's what happened with both Salem and Medjugorje. The minister got a hold of it, and once the minister gets a hold of it, it takes on a life of its own.
Mm-hmm. What do you say to people who they want to just leave it alone because people seem to be helped by it, and it's their money, so why don't you just, mind your own business? I've heard that too. Hey, get a life, stop talking about this, because my uncle, he went and he was messed up guy, and now he goes to church every day. So I guess it's a smaller version of the fruits argument.
It's a smaller version, and then you ask, well, what about the uncle who got a divorce when he came back? What about that? What about the lives that got ruined by this whole thing? What about the guy whose wife left him and joined some type of cult as a result of this thing? It's all selective, and I'm saying that it's had a pernicious effect for the entire church. First of all, because it is undermining the traditional authority structure of the church, but secondly, it's fostering. I think it's the lifeblood. The money is the lifeblood of whatever this corrupt mafia is that basically forced Benedict out of office. I think it's a combination of money and sex. That would make sense, because that's the way the devil corrupts most people in this world. And why would Medjugorje be any different in that regard? And so you may call it the homosexual mafia. Someone may but the homosexual mafia in Rome may very well be involved in sex trafficking in Medjugorje and money laundering. I got an email from a member of the Bosnian parliament And he said every single religious house there is engaged in money laundering. Bosnia-Herzegovina is a lawless region. It's full of criminal behavior, and they need, when you have criminal enterprises, you need some way to get this into the legitimate economy. Mm-hmm. And that's what the role that these places are playing now at Medjugorje. And a lot of that money goes to Rome. Why am I saying this? Because Bishop Nilica, who I also mentioned in my book, who used to be known as Bishop Briefcase, used to show up in Medjugorje with an empty briefcase that was filled with cash, and then he'd take it back to Rome. He was arrested and tried in an Italian court because he tried to use that money to buy Roberto Calvi's briefcase, because he thought he could get access to all of that money, that illegal money that was circulating around the Pay Due scandal. So there's evidence there for this type of criminal behavior, and I think that's the main reason why this thing continues. As I said, the main indication of whether Francis is going to get control over the church is whether he reigns in Medjugorje. And now it looks as if it's not going to happen. It looks that way.
Well, once again, in his Peronist style of leading and speaking, he's telegraphed that he doesn't buy it by saying things like, Our Lady's not a postmistress sending messages every day. I mean, what does anybody think he's referring to? On the other hand, he lets the line go out and the fish goes all over the ocean without being reined in. It's another double message.
It's in many ways, it's like symptomatic of the church. The church at this point affirms the tradition on paper, and then they undermine it in practice, like annulments. Any number of examples like this. Like this whole attempt to undermine the whole prohibition against divorced and remarried receiving communion. Pastoral solutions as a way of basically undermining the traditional teaching with pastoral practices. Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing the same thing with Medjugorje, except that there's no affirmation, because no one in his right mind, not even the most corrupt member of the Vatican, could in his wildest dreams ever claim that this is true or legitimate. There's just too much evidence, too much negative evidence, including the evidence that's posted on the Diocese of Mostar website. You're never going to be able to get around that. You will never be able to approve this. The whole story of Vlasic's trafficking in spirits and is leading to his defrocking. It's on their website. You can't get around this. You can't get around it. So, but at least you can't deal with it. You can't get around it by saying, "Oh, we're going to approve it." So instead of saying, "Well, we can't approve it, but we'll allow," but yes, this shouldn't be taken as approval. But on the other hand, we're sending a delegation of archbishops. But don't think it's approval. And they're all going to take all these impressionable young people there, and they're all going to go to mass. But this doesn't mean that we approve it, or that they could ever get the idea that we're well, this is preposterous.
Right. Yeah, I call it the nevertheless phenomenon or syndrome. X, nevertheless, Y, right?
And it contradicts the gospel, which says basically say yes or say no.
Another answer to the small fruits argument, and you point this out in the opening chapters of the book. By the way, I'll just flash the title up here. The Medjugorje Deception, Queen of Peace, Ethnic Cleansing, Ruined Lives. And that's the number of marriages that have been destroyed over this thing. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Couples, one or both go to Medjugorje, and they have this intense, emotional, almost visceral experience they can't deny, totally changes their lives. And the other spouse doesn't want to buy into it, doesn't see the point, doesn't compute. They're living their life in the sacraments of the church, but it's not enough for the zealot. And that builds and builds and builds until the marriage ends. You've got example after example in your book.
Yeah, and I think there's another aspect which I'd have to call asset stripping here that goes on here. And I've documented this in the book, where they will kind of try and figure out what kind of assets you have. And if you're a wealthy businessman from California, they will come up to you and say, "Would you like to be in the apparition room when the apparition takes place?" And of course, who wouldn't like to be there with the Blessed Mother? And then after the apparition, they will say, "Well, the Blessed Mother had a message for you." And at this point, you're already set up, and now your heart starts beating a little fast. And it turns out that the message is, you should make a contribution to Medjugorje. And so people get lured into this money trap, this asset stripping, and of course that causes resentment as well. People start to resent the fact that their spouses are now under some type of control of other people, and that they're going to suffer for it financially.
Mm-hmm. The apparition room, I think, was used for many years through the 80s and 90s at this Caritas Birmingham, run by a guy who writes under the name, it's a phony name, Friend of Medjugorje, Terry Colafrancesco. You mentioned him in the book as well. And, plunk down some dinars and you get to watch, is it Ivanka? Forget which of the seer, perhaps Maria Pavlovich, the one who got married, and she came to Alabama for a medical procedure.
Right. I think it was Maria Pavlovich.
And that's another... right.
I think that's what it is. And then he mowed the lawn right under the tree where the Blessed Mother was supposed to appear.
Right, because it's good.
It's like a helicopter. You kind of put the sheets out. You make this big cross so that the helicopter can land right where you want it to land.
I'm still stuck on it. Makes for good reading. Spin-offs. You've got Teresa Lopez, the Mother Cabrini fake seer from Denver. You've got Conyers, Georgia. I believe her name is Nancy Fowler. You have Gianna Talone Sullivan, formerly of Arizona, now in Baltimore. And I believe the Holy Love Shrine outside Cleveland, is that also a Medjugorje spinoff?
I don't know. You probably know more about later developments than I do.
There's a lot of them. Anne, a lay apostle, whose support from Sister Breege McKenna and Father Kevin Scallon disappeared. That's another Medjugorje spinoff. Her real name's Kathleen Ann Clark.
Yeah.
You have a lot of these people, they go to Medjugorje, they catch the spirit, they come home, and voila, it starts happening to them. The spinning sun, the gold rosaries. What do you make of the gold rosaries? Because people, that's like a big deal for them. My rusty rosary became golden. Does that go?
Actually, I took gold rosaries to Medjugorje. They turned to plastic while I was there. So I took that as a sign as well.
You're terrible. I don't want to encourage you. Wow. Yeah, maybe it's another one of those.
So what you had was a fertile ground here. Like the 1990s, I believe, was like the peak of spin-off apparitions. And the fertile ground is basically the kind of secularized culture where as part of the research I'm doing right now, I'm finishing up the Logos book.
Yeah.
The collapse of Thomism at Notre Dame University, the complete banning, and it was replaced by the crudest type of analytic philosophy and scientism of the kind that you get from Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens or one of these shills, Bill Nye, whatever. And this is a completely materialistic universe, and you're kind of pushed into a corner where the religion really, that's the truth about the universe, and this is just there to make you feel good, and you say, okay, I agree. It's here to make me feel good. I need to feel good. I don't care. Yeah. And so you immediately succumb to these basically phony operations that are opium. They are the opium of the people. And it leads, but those things, I see them as a phenomenon of 20 years ago. I don't see that happening now.
Mirjana got out of the apparition business and then got back in. Do you think that was for economic reasons? She saw...
Yeah, apparently her husband's used car dealership failed, so she needed money. So she started having pilgrims live in her house, and she'd have the apparition in your house, which was convenient. It's like a one-stop shopping here. You don't have to get out and walk down to the church to have the apparition. You can have it, in your bedroom slippers at the morning with coffee, I guess, or something like that.
Reading Poem of the Man God.
Something like that. I was there, last time I was there, Ivan was still going down to the apparitions, and he had a big BMW, and he nearly hit me driving down the road. I don't think it was intentional.
Mike, I wanted to ask you, were you warned that Franciscans are going to bring harm to you before you went?
Yes, I did. I was warned. I was warned not to go back. But at that point, I had no intention of going back, so it didn't really matter. The last time I was there, I walked down the Apparition Hill with Philip Pavic, and we were talking, and coming up the hill was Father Slavko Barbaric. And he knew me because I had interviewed him in '88. So if looks could kill, I would have been dead, okay? Because he looked at me, he looked at Philip Pavic. He had some sense that Pavic was telling me stories that he didn't want told.
Yeah.
But nothing happened. Nothing happened.
Did Father Pavic ever get over his persistent ambiguity? Because he knew the truth, but he was so invested in it, and maybe people looked up to him as some kind of link between the skeptics and the true apostles. Did he ever say, "This is BS," and people stop wasting your money here? Did he get to that point?
To me, he was never ambiguous to me in my conversations with me. This was the late '90s. He was never ambiguous. He said it's a hoax, and he was just trying. He realized that it was a hoax long before I arrived to talk to him, but he felt that these pilgrims needed some type of straight spiritual advice in the confessional, so he stayed on.
I guess maybe ambiguity is the wrong word. Maybe tension. He cares for the people who were naive enough to plunk down thousands of dollars. On the other hand, he didn't want to validate the claims because he knew they were bogus.
I don't think he could have done it and stayed in Medjugorje. I think he would have been killed if he had gone out publicly and stayed there. That would have threatened the economy, and so he felt. I don't think he felt he could have done anything publicly. He came back to Chicago, and at that point, I've lost track of him. I haven't seen him in years, and I don't know whether he said anything publicly or not after that. You would probably know better than I.
Yeah, I thought he passed away, but I could be wrong. I'm not sure. I saw in Hamilton, Ontario, Ivan Dragisevich have his apparition experience. And that was the strangest thing. That was the final nail in my coffin about this. He get down in his
coffin.
That's right. No one's ever mentioned that. Strange. He looked bored out of his skull. He was kind of mouthing something up into the sky, and it was $15 to go in to see the thing. So it was like a ticketed event. And I thought, he's not seeing anything, or he's seeing something that's not the Blessed Virgin. Because, and this is something I've noticed from watching a couple of the YouTubes that are still, every time Mirjana has one of these apparitions, there are 100 cameras around her. The message went on and on and on. Probably, it felt like an eternity. It was probably 10 or 15 minutes. And then someone came out and read the message. And it was like 3 sentences. And the most vapid, insipid, it didn't even rise to the level of being interesting enough to be heretical. Just kind of hallmark pablum. I thought that's one of the issues. Mark Miravalli did his dissertation on the so-called messages of Medjugorje to show that they weren't heretical. Well, whoever said they rose to the level of heresy? First of all, they're not. What you're reading is not what the seers said. It's what the Franciscans said the seers said. And they provide this buffer. Well, they have all sorts of degrees in theology from German universities, so they're not going to let anything out that they know is heterodox. So what you have is just this vapid, repetitive nonsense. And it gets published in the South Bend Tribune on a regular basis. Dennis Nolan would put messages in the South Bend Tribune. And they were all the same type of vapid message that never rose to the level of anything. That's what we've been dealing with for decades now. Think it's reasonable for Catholics to conclude that Pope Francis will condemn it absolutely with no ambiguity?
No. I think all of these recent visits are an indication that there will be no condemnation. And no condemnation is a victory for those people, because they don't want any type of clear statement. It's a victory for the Medjugorje supporters because they don't want a clear statement, because they can go on doing what they're doing, making money hand over fist from gullible pilgrims, undisturbed. And now with looks like quasi-church approval.
There are 2 levels of rejection. One is non-constat de supernaturalitate, which is the assessment given by the Zadar Declaration in 1991, and this is the official Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. It's a rejection, but it's not the Constat Dinon Supernaturalitate, which is the, Necedah, Wisconsin, Bayside, double thumbs down, this ain't happening ever. And I've had fanatics come up to me and say, Medjugorje has not been approved yet. And my response is, if I ask a beautiful woman to marry me and she doesn't answer me, that's a no until she says yes.
Yeah. Yes. Well, the Bishop Perich did reverse it and say he can substantiate the fact that there's nothing supernatural happening here. So that was a step farther than the Bishops' Conference did in 1991.
For the movement that says, when the movement says that the bishops were recalcitrant and the Holy Father took it out of his hand, I heard this a million times, it was taken out of his hands. Isn't the reverse true? Didn't Bishop Žanić and now Bishop Perich beg the Holy See to intervene because the locals couldn't care less about their authority?
Right. They both bishops told me that. Both Bishop Žanić and Bishop Perich told me that. Perich in 96 or 7 when I was there said he'd prefer to have these has other things to do. There are lots of issues there that he'd have to deal with. He doesn't want to spend all his time dealing with Medjugorje. It would be good if Rome were to take this off his hands.
Right.
Yes, that's true. I thought that's what the Ruini Commission was going to be, but turned out to not to be that way.
Yeah, Camillo Ruini, the Roman cardinal who's the head of it, and I from all indications, it was going to be what people like yourself and Donald Foley assumed it would be. Once the Holy Father had a chance to review it, he's been reviewing it for 4 years now. It was on his desk since 2015. So we're still in this strange no man's land. Did you meet with Cardinal Ratzinger in Dallas? Did I remember that correctly?
I met with him. I met with him in Philadelphia. That's the first time I mentioned it to him. That was in person in Philadelphia at St. Charles Seminary. And then I called him on the phone when he was in Dallas. And that was the conversation where I said, he said, well, we're going to issue a statement. And I said, when? And he said, soon. This was in German. This was in German. I spoke in German, so bald is what he said. And then I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, soon. That's all he would say. And that was the end of the conversation.
Is there some dim analog here between the permission by silence that John Paul II gave to Medjugorje and the permission by silence and maybe even endorsement of Father Marcel Maciel, the disgraced Legionaries founder? Because in both cases, as soon as Benedict became the Pope, Vlasic is defrocked, laicized immediately, and Maciel was taken out. Because Benedict was...
I don't think that Ratzinger had the sense of political urgency that John Paul II had. I think John Paul II was willing to tolerate things because he saw some type of political advantage coming from them. The Vatican was the first, Vatican and Germany, I think Vatican before Germany, the first country to recognize Croatia as an independent country was the Vatican, which immediately created a crisis in the relations with the Orthodox. Because they felt that this is Rome again. They're using the United States empire as a way of pursuing their agenda. It had a bad effect on that. It's had a bad effect on the church in general. My hope when Francis became Pope was that he would be able to disconnect the church from the American empire, from neoconservatism. Because this is clearly was the way that Ratzinger was. Time magazine called Ratzinger the first American Pope. I think the relationship between the church and the American empire that was created under John Paul II and Ronald Reagan was bad for the church. It was way too close, and there was lots of collateral damage in the church. And my hope was that Francis would disconnect it, which in some ways he has. But he seems to have this constituency among the sexual left and seems to be pursuing that agenda. I see a lot of similarities between Donald Trump and Pope Francis.
I've said the same thing. I've said Francis is the Trump of the left.
Because what you see with Trump is a completely irrational policy based on certain constituencies, and I'm going to give these constituencies what they want. So it's Israel, it's the homosexuals, and it's pro-lifers. They all get something from Donald Trump. That's incoherent. And I think you see the same thing now with certain constituencies that we would call the St. Gallen group in places like Germany, who have an agenda and lots of money, and they want to pursue this agenda. And I just see Medjugorje as an example of that, of people that are saying, well, these are good people. Let's not condemn this. These are good people. It's bearing good fruits. Let's just be pastoral. And as soon as you say the word pastoral, you can tolerate any number of abuses.
And this is where people have to understand that Peronism is not about liberal versus conservative. Like the Franciscan clashes with the local ordinary had nothing to do with conservatives.
It is
like
right. That. It is like that. There is no like coherence here. Like it's a left-right battle. There's no sense of principle here. I think it's basically anti-principle. If there's a principle and the Pope can kind of override it in a pastoral way, like my pastor, a lady writes to him, my pastor won't allow me to go to communion. Well, I'm allowing you because I'm the Pope, and complete disregard of principle because of being pastoral.
If you compare Fatima or Lourdes or any of the approved apparitions, they're pithy. They're like lightning in a bottle. They're accompanied by something unusual and undeniable, whether it's the miracle of the sun or, the thing, all the prophecies of Fatima have come true in vivid, unique ways. With Medjugorje, it's I'm tempted to say it's anti-logos. It's complicated. There's secrets. It's all apocalyptic. It's all over the map. You can't get your arm around it. It's like, to summarize Fatima or Lourdes is one thing. You can do it in a couple of sentences. But Medjugorje is this endless, like trying to pin Jello to the wall. Anti-logos. Right. Does that make sense?
That is why I felt so much frustration at the beginning, because I could go to the Fatima message. You can see it in Portuguese. You can read Portuguese. You see there are 3 dots there where they omitted a certain part of it. And you can read it, and this is it. And then you try, well, what's the equivalent to Medjugorje? And you're flooded with propaganda and pictures and the same stories going round and round and round without any type of foundation. Like if I were Pope, I'd be in Medjugorje now. All this type of stuff. And at that point, the frustration level led me to conclude I have to do something, and looking into it, I have to conclude that it's false. And I have good authorities on my side in saying that.
Mm-hmm. I want to maybe close with going back to the beginning, and I watched with interest the Visions on Demand, because it paralleled what I saw in a CBC documentary. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, no friend of the Catholic Church, they sent a reporter there in I think the late 80s, and you can just see the contempt the Franciscans had toward the local bishop, Bishop Žanić. And I think it was Adrian Clarkson, the CBC reporter, said, well, he's the bishop. And, it's a forgettable name, starts with S, Svet something. Anyway, doesn't matter. He's kind of rolling his eyes and kind of contemptuously referring to the bishop. But you sat down with Father Zovko, who conducted a series of interviews that are on tape. You mentioned the transcripts. You asked him about Marian Pehar, and you asked him whether he was charismatic. And body language is not infallible, but obviously he was not telling you the truth. Yeah. You remember that conversation?
I do remember it vaguely. It was in Široki Brijeg. I remember going there. You know what I remember more than the talk with Zovko? All of the pictures of the Ustasha soldiers that were on the wall.
Now, for folks, what's the compressed version? What's the Ustasha, Croatian nationalist?
It was basically when the German Third Reich armies invaded Croatia. There was a local Croatian movement called the Ustasha that supported the Nazis and engaged in attacks on the Serbian population. Now, this has all been manipulated by people like Avro Manhattan, who wrote a story about it, a kind of pro-Tito story after the war that was used. This information was manipulated and used to attack Cardinal Stepinac, who I think was a saintly man who does deserve to be canonized. Mm-hmm. But there was something there, and that's the Ustasha. And these people, Zovko, deliberately tried to provoke a reaction by putting the gerb, which is the red and white checkerboard symbol of Croatian nationalism, up on the altar. He had no business doing that. Okay, he deliberately tried to provoke some type of persecution so that he could become a martyr, and the bitter fruit of all this was the Civil War. The Civil War did break out, and it was funded by money from Medjugorje. The Croatians were buying weapons with money from Medjugorje. The Croatian Franciscans, the rebellious Franciscans, had created a bank in Mostar that was funding this kind of stuff.
Yeah, another disanalogy with Fatima. The Gospa is called the Queen of Peace. She arrives just before Yugoslavia is, tears itself apart.
Well, they used to say one of the signs of the authenticity of the messages is that ethnic groups are living in peace in Yugoslavia. Well, how long did that last? Didn't last very long.
Have you heard stories of bombers dropping bombs in Medjugorje and them magically not going off? I've heard that a lot too.
Yeah, I was in Mostar right after the war. Mostar really looked bad. Medjugorje hadn't been touched at all. Mostar had been. The bridge wasn't there. That is the symbol of there. The bridge was in the Neretva River, and I walked over there and had pictures of me taken on them. And they may be in Visions on Demand for that. But anyway, the Croats had an alliance with the Muslims. Suddenly they turned on the Muslims, and they fought a battle right at the Neretva, drove the Muslims across the Neretva into the eastern part of Mostar. So everything along there was just shot up, but nothing in Medjugorje had been touched. So
was the Ustasha responsible for the Shermanski massacre?
Yes, I mean it depends on what you mean by. Were there Ustasha officers there? I don't know for a fact, but it was part of that movement. They were definitely part of that movement. Yes, I did. The bishop, not the bishop, the mayor of Shermanski contacted me after the book came out originally. And they put it up on their website. They translated it into Serbian, and they put it up on their website. And I had a lot of correspondence with people who were involved in the war, including people who came to my house, refugees from the war in Serbia who had read the book and came and visited with me and told me stories about the American involvement in the war, the attack on Serbia. It was one of the darkest. It's just an awful thing, what happened there. Awful. Totally undeserved. One more reason to put both Clintons behind bars. That was Bill Clinton. Hillary Clinton did Libya. They both deserve to be behind bars, but it's just a shameful period in American history.
Well, things carry on today. Hopefully, people will understand why I wanted to have you back on the show, Mike, and that is to encourage people to pay attention to the objective, authoritative teaching of the church and not be swayed by ear-tickling things that make you feel great but have no basis in fact and truth. I look forward to having you back when the Logos book is out.
Thank you. Thank you. It's my pleasure.
I heard it's going to be just a little thin booklet, right?
I can't say at this point. I don't want to make any false promises here.
I hear you. Okay, very good. CultureWars.com, by the way, I'm putting all the links to Visions on Demand, to the book we've been discussing, which is The Medjugorje Deception, Queen of Peace, Ethnic Cleansing, Ruined Lives, also Donald Foley and Father Ivo Sievert's book as well. E. Michael Jones, thanks for your work. Thanks for joining me once again.
Thank you, Pat. My pleasure.
This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?
Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. If you like what you see and hear and you want to see and hear more, consider joining Coffin Nation as a full member. Just click right here and find out more about what that means. Nipsey, my fedora. That's Coffin Nation, the world's largest online community of culture builders. Click right here. See you on the inside.